Hello, any volunteer to lead us in an opening prayer? Hello? Let me choose at random. I think, yes. Carol Danila, please lead us in an opening prayer.
Let's humble ourselves for prayer. Lord Father, we want to thank you for today. Thank you for keeping us safe throughout the night. And Lord Father, thank you for enabling us to join in for these lessons. Even as we learn, may you enable us to understand each and everything that you're going to learn. We want to thank you for our teachers. We want to thank you for our parents. We want to thank you for the work that they do in our lives. And even as we learn, may you enable us to remember each and everything. Thank you for all this we believe and in Jesus' name.
Thank you, Akelo. Girls, we are continuing with the British occupation of the Cape and the Batavian rule. But last week we did not complete the factors for the collapse of the Batavians. Let me call upon Madam Nelima Beatrice to continue from where she ended from. Madam Nelima, are you with us?
Oh, yes, I am.
Please continue.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and everybody's welcome on board. We are here to wind up something on the Batavians, but as we do that, we need to remind ourselves that the Cape has occupied 3 different groups of the Europeans. The first group came from Netherlands, Holland, we call them the Dutch, and they were under the Date, that company which controlled administration at the Cape. Then for a long while, they took administration in their hands, but events happened in Europe, and the British came in and occupied the Cape for a very short time. Then again, because of the events in Europe, the Cape was handed over to another group of the Europeans. They also come from Holland, but this time they were called Batavians. And when we were studying last time, we got to know who the Batavians were. So we see that after the Batavians did very good work at the Cape, they introduced very good reforms. But then
what's wrong with this teacher?
Pardon? Hello? Somebody saying something?
Hello?
Is somebody saying something?
Yes, I overheard someone saying something.
Like
And I think with that, anyway, we can continue. I don't see any hand raised. Please, dear girls, if you want to ask anything, raise your hand.
Okay, so we're saying that the Dutch under the Date occupied the Cape. Then because of events in Europe, they lost that control and the British took over. Then again, because of events in Europe, which we have already discussed, the Cape fell in the hands of the Batavians. And we said Batavians were Republicans who took control of Netherlands after the monarch had lost power. So the Batavians took charge. The Batavians in the Cape were representing the Batavian Republic in Netherlands. So the Batavians, you must note that they were also Dutch. Okay. After that, we saw that they did many things. And after doing so many good things, within a short while of only 3 years, their rule came to an end. And we gave reasons why their rule came to an end. We are winding up these reasons. We have some few. We want to wind them up. And one of the reasons why the Batavians lost control of the Cape was majorly with the influence of the British, as we saw. Now, we are continuing to see that in 1815, there was something called Vienna Settlement. This was a meeting of so many European leaders in a place called Vienna. It's a city of one of the countries in Europe called Austria, not Australia. Australia is a continent, but we are looking at a small country in Europe called Austria. Its capital or a city there is called Vienna. So many leaders of the European countries met in Vienna and they agreed. Why did they meet? This was when they had defeated the French revolutionary called Napoleon Bonaparte. So when they defeated the French who had gone ahead conquering many European countries, they had to come for a settlement or some kind of peace. So in that agreement, they officially gave the Cape to the British. Why did they give the Cape to Britain? They rewarded her for having participated in bringing Napoleon down. Mr. Kagaba, is it okay we look at that hand up or we continue first?
Let us first look at what she's asking.
Yes.
And then I request girls that to ask questions at the end of your presentation. Yes, Lucinga.
Yes, teacher, I wanted to ask, why is Australia called a continent, yet it doesn't have different countries in it?
Pardon?
Why is Australia called a continent? Why is Australia called a continent? Does it have different countries in it, or is it just one big thing?
We shall come to that. Maybe somebody will give us that view. But for now, I just wanted to differentiate between, I didn't want you to think that Vienna is in Australia. Vienna is a city in a country called Austria. But according to the settlement of this world, according to the geographers, they found it suitable to have Australia as an independent continent. But you can still Google it up and we find the details. But in line with what we are studying, we are saying Vienna is found in a country in Europe called Austria.
Madame Nelima,
Austria.
I didn't capture the question very well. What was she asking?
She's asking why Australia is called termed as a continent. That has it got any other countries there?
It has no any other country there. We don't have any other country in the continent of Australia. But I think she will get much of the details when it comes to continental drifting. I don't know whether they teach it in geography at this level, geography paper 1, but in any case, it is there at A level. Okay, but as you have explained and put it right, Australia is a continent and Australia is a country in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, so we get back, and the girls, we shall request you that you ask questions which are within the scope of study. So in this case, Vienna is found in a country called Austria, and they sat there after defeating Napoleon of France, who had gone around terrorizing many European countries. So when Napoleon was defeated, the countries which participated in defeating Napoleon met in Vienna, and they agreed to apportion some of the territories that Napoleon had taken. So one of the areas that was given to Britain to thank her for fighting Napoleon was the Cape. So that's why we see in this point that the Vienna settlement formalized the British occupation at the Cape, and this part led to the British settlement at the Cape. So when the British were given the Cape, there was no way the Batavians would still remain there. Why? Because already we saw that the Batavians were allies of the French, and the British were worried that the Batavians would pass the Cape to their friends who were the French. So in this case, they took over and they controlled. That led to the decline or to the collapse of the Batavians. Then there was need to establish a coaling station where the traders would call in, would rest at the Cape. That also made the British to take over the Cape, and hence the loss of Batavian control. We see that the French, or France as a country, attacked Netherlands in that period of time from 1794 to 95. And when the French attacked Netherlands, Netherlands became very weak. Why? Because they could no longer do the businesses they were doing. If anything, even their financial position became very weak because they had been interrupted by the French invasion. And this is the time when we saw that the king of Netherlands, who was called William V, went away to England. So that also weakened the financial position of the Batavians. Let's move of Batavians. Thank you. Another slide, Mr. Kagaba, as we move on. So another reason why the Batavian rule collapsed was because of the British interest in the presence of good natural harbors. The Cape had very good harbors which would anchor the trading ships, and this attracted the British, who made sure they take over the Cape from the hands of the Batavians. And another reason which attracted the British to take over the Cape was availability of fresh water at the Cape. The Cape had good water for both human life and the animals, even industrial work. So such good water would provide a basis for people to relieve themselves of thirst and any other domestic use, such that those who would be traveling would also anchor there and get good water. So that attracted the British, who ended the Batavian rule. And there was also a need to make the Cape their refreshing center. The British were also interested in trade, yes. And they wanted a place where they, hello, let's control our background members. There was a need for the British to establish a place where they would rest, especially after traveling along the continent of Africa. So there was a need to make the Cape a resting place, a place where they would rest as human beings, a place where they would even repair their ships and wait until they would move on again. And that, of course, would also bring in other traders to take part, and the British would get money. So all these factors compelled the British to take over the Cape for the second time. So in our conclusion, we see that the factors for the collapse of Batavians were more external. So girls, this doesn't mean that there were no internal factors. They could have been there, but then we are saying majority of those factors that forced the Batavians to lose control were mainly from out of their control. They were external. But we need to mark this. We need to note, girls, that the changes that the Batavians established at the Cape, they were not intended for the Africans. Those changes were intended to better the lives of the whites who were there. Only that some few of those changes helped the Africans, like the Khoikhoi got land. The point is that the policies or the changes were mainly for the good of the whites. Then I also want us to know that after the Batavians lost control, then the British came for the second time. Like we explained in our previous lesson, the British came in the Cape and took over for the second time, and they established their control at the Cape. So when they established their control at the Cape, they based on some of the changes that the Batavians had put in place, and they continued with them. They established what we call British reforms. British reforms or British changes or British policies. So our next segment of study is going to be the British reforms. And at this time, Mr. Kagaba.
Yes.
Mr. Kagaba.
Yes, Madam Nelima.
Madam Grace Namirembe is on board. I'm not sure whether I think we are going to share the reforms between you and her, I think.
Pardon?
You are going to discuss both of you.
It's okay, we shall handle that.
Yeah,
Madam Nelima?
Yes, please.
As you are discussing, I thought of a question.
Yes, please.
And probably one girl should help me to answer the question.
Yes.
And the question is, why did the British re-annex the Cape in 1806? Why did the British annex the Cape in 1806?
Okay,
Please,
maybe
girls.
I just wanted to add, on that question in the form of making it simpler for them, that why did the British take over the Cape for the second time? So when you're answering that question, give those reasons which you think made the British to take over the Cape or to come to the Cape for the second time.
Excuse
Teacher
me,
Nelima.
Yes, please, Teacher Grace. Teacher Grace. You are not clear.
Breaking. I think you need to relocate and better your network. Voice is great and better your network.
Myself.
Yes, your voice has been.
Madam Namirembe. Madam Namirembe.
Yes. Yes,
you are
Mr.
the one
Kagaba.
having a problem with the network. Madam Nelima is clear.
Oh.
You are the one with the challenge.
Let me work on it.
Okay.
Okay.
So, dear girls, please, can you answer the question that I posed?
The question, teacher.
Why did the British take over the Cape for the second time?
For the second time in 1806.
Okay, Jovia.
Yes, I can see Jovia. Jovia is putting up her hand.
Yes, Jovia, unmute and submit.
The abrogation of the Amiens Peace Treaty by both the British and the French.
Try to be loud, Jovia.
We don't get it there.
The abrogation of the Amiens Peace Treaty by both the British and the French that revived the war between France and Europe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Answer. Thank you.
Madam Nelima.
Yes, please.
The point I wanted to emphasize to the girls is that now we are giving them a heading, factors for the collapse of the Batavian rule at the Cape. They should also bear in mind that the factors for the collapse of the Batavian rule at the Cape are the same as the reasons why the British reoccupied the Cape in 1806. So we can't keep giving different headings, but under the same factors. So, for example, the violation of the Amiens Treaty, as Jovia has put it, partly contributed to the collapse of the Batavian rule, but also contributed to the reoccupation of the Cape by the British in 1806. Thank you very much, Madam Nelima, for the good presentation. Girls, anyone with a question regarding what has been presented? Please, in case you have a question, please, can you raise the question?
Okay, seemingly not. Mr. Kagaba, you can move on.
So we can move on. And
Madam Press, who of us is starting? Is it
Yes,
Madam
please.
Press or you?
Hello?
Who of us is starting? Grace or
Madam Nelima, we agreed that I'm going to start.
you? Okay. Then along the way, Teacher Grace.
Yes.
Okay.
Girls, we have what we call the British at the Cape. We see the British coming in 1795, the British coming at the Cape in 1795. The British coming at the Cape in 1795, and when they came at the Cape in 1795, then what happens? What happens is this, is that they stay at the Cape 7 years when the British are at the Cape.
William?
Yes?
William?
Yes,
Will you
please.
please repeat yourself because you broke off and we didn't get you? somehow we didn't get what you were saying.
1790. And when they came at the Cape in 1795, then eventually they stayed at the Cape until 1802. When the Batavians I was saying, I'm sorry, I'm breaking. Until 1802, when the Batavians came in, and when the Batavians came, then they ruled the Cape until 1806, as we have agreed. So the British, we saw them coming again in 1806, reoccupying the Cape, and after consolidating their rule at the Cape, they introduced a number of reforms. We have already looked at the reasons why the British came and occupied the Cape in 1870, in 1806. So when they settled at the Cape, they initiated a number of reforms. And these reforms were economic, were social, were administrative. All these were the reforms. The first reform that the British actually initiated, somebody is having a hand, raising a hand. Probably let me look at this person. Namugabo.
Daphne, you can unmute.
I wanted to ask the meaning of reforms.
Reforms means changes. Those are the meaning is changes.
We actually mean changes. Changes that were introduced by the British at the Cape. Then Cynthia, you are asking something?
Teacher, I wanted to ask what the meaning of consolidating is.
The meaning of consolidating. Consolidating means like bringing together. Madam Nelima, can you go ahead and explain bringing together? Madam Nelima?
Yes, to consolidate something is to put something, like Mr. Kagaba said, bring together, to put something strong, to make something strong. For instance, when you're a leader, you come to the office, you make your administration strong by what? When you're making your administration strong, you are consolidating it. So to consolidate is to put something together and make it strong. So in this case, we are saying the British took control of the Cape and they had to make their rule strong and stable at the Cape. And for them to make their rule stable and strong at the Cape, they had to introduce some changes, which changes were not the same way of rule like the Dake Company had done. So there were so many things that needed to be changed at the Cape. So the British did that change. And when they changed, they made their rule stable and strong. That's why we use the word consolidate.
Thank you very much, Madam Nelima, for that detailed explanation. What are you saying? When we are looking at the changes or the reforms introduced by the British at the Cape, we need to bear in mind that we have the achievements of the Dutch or what the Dutch had implemented at the Cape. Because now we are going to see the British undoing most of the things that had been done by the Dutch. In other words, when you are changing from one point to another point. So we are going to see that the British were undoing most of the things that had been implemented by the Dutch at the Cape for more than 100 years. One, economically, all the trade barriers were removed. Thereafter, freedom of trade was introduced. You remember, girls, during the time of the Dutch, there was no freedom of trade. There were a lot of trade barriers, and the Boers were restricted from dealing in particular products, and these barriers were put in place to favor the company, the Dutch East Indian Company, so as to have control, so as to favor this company, because this company was a chartered company and it was doing business at the Cape. So it put in place the barriers and restrictions so as to enable the company make profits. So when the British came at the Cape, they removed these barriers and introduced freedom of trade at the Cape. That is one of the major changes. 2, salaries of civil servants were reduced and expenditure on the public works was also reduced. Before the coming of the British at the Cape, the company used to pay a lot of salaries or high salaries to the company administrators. But when the British took over, they reduced what was being paid to the administrators. They reduced what was spent on public works. The reason for this is that the Dutch East Indian Company, by 1795, it had run bankrupt. Being bankrupt means that you have money, but you are unable to pay your own debts. It had a lot of debts. So in other words, it could not balance her own budget. So for the British to balance the budget, what they did was to reduce on what was paid to the administrators, to the government officials, and to reduce the expenditure on public works like roads and schools so as to balance the budget. So we see the British reducing the salaries of civil servants. Next, all the restrictions that had been put on farmers, like barring them from growing certain crops, were removed. Girls, you remember sometimes back, we said that farmers were not allowed, for example, to grow crops like barley, to grow crops like tobacco, and these were actually very profitable crops, and they were not allowed to grow them. And this had affected the profitability of their activities. But when the British came in, then the farmers were allowed to grow all the crops, and this helped them to increase on their income. Then next, for one to own land, it had to be surveyed, fenced, marked, and documented in order to have its land title. Previously, you remember, there was an unplanned expansion of the farmers, of the Boers. They would move inside. You remember we looked at the expansion of the Cape Colony. You remember we had looked at the expansion of the Cape Colony. Inside, in the interior, it kept on expanding and expanding and expanding, and we said it expanded up to the Fish River. And when it kept on expanding, the Boers or the farmers kept on acquiring land, and other natives of the Cape, like the British, kept on acquiring land. And this land was not surveyed, this land was not fenced, and this partly caused the wars on the eastern frontier. So when the British came in, they introduced a reform, and they said, for you to own land, you must survey it must be mapped, and it must be documented in order for you to have a land title. This was the new arrangement introduced by the British at the Cape. Next, the British pound was introduced in 1825, and the Dutch Rijksdollar that had greatly depreciated was removed. Before the coming of the British at the Cape, the money, the currency at the Cape that was used was called the Dutch Rijksdollar. That was the money. Like we have the Ugandan shillings, they also had the Dutch Rijksdollar. And this money had greatly depreciated. When we say depreciated, it actually means that it had lost value greatly. So when the British came at the Cape, they introduced a new currency called the British pound to replace the Dutch Rijksdollar. It means now even the money that was to be used at the Cape changed from the Dutch Rijksdollar to the British pound. That was another arrangement. Then the policy of giving help to the settlers was stopped in 1825 to mobilize funds for real economic recovery of the Cape. As I told you, girls, before the coming of the British, the Dutch East Indian Company used to support the settlers, to give them the money. so as to progress, so as to start farms, so as to do all these things to acquire land and the rest. But in 1825, we see that when the British came in, this policy was stopped. Why was it stopped? It was stopped simply because it had made the economy collapse.
William,
Unable to
William.
run the economy. So
you better repeat that point because you broke off.
I was saying the policy
Kindly.
of giving help to the settlers was stopped in 1825 to mobilize funds for real economic recovery of the Cape. And when this policy was actually stopped, when this policy was stopped because it had made the government bankrupt, it had made the company, the Dutch East Indian Company, bankrupt and collapse. So it means it was stopped in 1825. Why? To mobilize funds for real economic recovery of the Cape. So we go to the changes in the press, girls. When we talk of the press, we mean newspapers, radio stations, we mean TV, we mean magazines, you know, what we call media. So one, freedom of press was granted to all people, and therefore press was liberalized. It means the government, now the British, allowed the people to own radios, allowed people to own TVs, allowed people to own newspapers, which were common by then. Unlike before, when there were a lot of restrictions on the press. So now it was liberalized. Whoever wanted to start a newspaper would start a newspaper freely. There was freedom of press. It was granted, and this was a new arrangement. In April 1828, a law requiring all the newspapers to deposit $300 before granting printing permission was passed. It meant actually that for you, if you were to start a newspaper, you had to pay $300 first, or 300 pounds, because now we are dealing in pounds. It means it was passed. Whoever wanted to start a newspaper had to pay that tax and then start one. This came in April 1828. Then, however, during the time of Charles Somerset, press censorship was highly encouraged. We are going to look at Charles Somerset, who was governor from 1814 to 1826. During his time, he restricted the press somehow. He restricted the press. But after his downfall, in 1828, we see liberalization of the press. So we should take a note of this, that Charles Somerset from 1814 to 1828, for him, he restricted the press, but after his downfall in 1826, then press was liberalized. Madam Namirembe Grace?
Yes,
Hello?
Mr. Kagaba.
I wanted you to come in
Yes,
here.
Mr. Kagaba.
Can you
Yes.
come in here?
Pardon, on the
Yes,
newspaper
thank-
part.
Pardon?
On the
Madam
newspaper part.
Namirembe.
Yeah, she's
Mr.
coming.
Kagaba, there is still a question. There is
Yes,
still
I'm going
a
to answer
question.
the question. From Faith,
Rebecca,
please
Rebecca,
answer the
go ahead
question.
and ask.
Excuse me,
Rebecca?
teacher. May you,
Rebecca,
teacher,
please
please may
talk.
you help?
Pardon?
Teacher, please may you help? Please may you help remind me? I don't know if I missed the lesson on the restrictions that were there in the press during the time of the Boers, the ones that needed reforms by the British.
Oh, thank you. During the time of Boers, you had actually certain newspapers that were liberal, like those supporting the African rights, like those supporting liberal policies, were banned and were not allowed to operate. The newspapers that were allowed operation were those supporting the Dutch Reformed Church and its policies and the policies of the Dutch East Indian Company. Those that were owned by the British, you know, the British were liberal, were restricted from operating. Those that criticized the Dutch Reformed Church and the Dutch East Indian Company were not allowed to operate during the time of the Dutch. So, Madam Nelima, do you have something to add there?
Mr.
No, it's
Kagaba.
fine. And now,
Mr.
Mr.
Kagaba.
Yes,
Mr. Kagaba.
Wanji.
I don't know whether the network will enable me deliver something to you, but let our girl get to know that during the time of the Dutch, there were very many laws governing and restricting the printing of newspapers in South Africa. But when the British came and took over, those laws and restricting newspapers were relaxed. And in fact, there were other newspapers that were put in place, like the Grahamstone Journal. There was the Zulu African and the Commercial Advertiser. So all these newspapers, there were no restrictions and they were allowed to operate.
Thank you, Madam Grace, for that detailed explanation. Girls, any other question? Any question, please?
Mr. Kagame, if there is no question, let us proceed because of time.
Yes, now it's
Okay.
Madam Grace.
Like you said in the beginning, that these reforms were introduced by the British, yes. They were in many aspects, political, social, and economic. They made reforms in administration, the judiciary, slavery, press, language and education, then the church. What the girls should know, that these reforms were mainly favoring the British who had taken over the Cape at the expense of the Dutch. Though they also catered for the Africans to a certain extent. Under administration, the reforms introduced in administration, in 1836, all the lawyers and the professional judges were allowed to serve in the High Court. What does this one mean? It means that during the time of the Dutch, the lawyers didn't have that chance of serving in the High Court. But when the British came in, there was some kind of freedom. They looked at lawyers as professional people and they were allowed to serve in the High Court, unlike before when the High Courts were dominated by the Dutch people. Another reform under administration introduced by the British, all the governors at the Cape had to be British. For example, Charles Somerset, 1814 to 1826. Then we had Sir Benjamin Durban, 1834 to 1838. What does this one mean? Yes, it was a reform, but there is a point here that says all the governors at the Cape had to be British, meaning the Dutch, much as it was a reform, but the Dutch were not considered. It was a chance for the British to take over. Under administration still, a Charter of Justice was set up in 1822, in which a Supreme Court was placed under the judiciary. A Supreme Court being placed under the judiciary, it meant that it became independent. I don't know whether we have that one in our country. I don't know whether the Supreme Court is independent in Uganda or it is controlled by an upper hand. But in South Africa, the Supreme Court was made independent and it would pass independent decisions without any control. More still under administration, a Supreme Court was also established to try big cases. During the time of the Dutch, they had a council of elders called the Volksraad, a council of elders. And that council was responsible for judging cases. This time, the Supreme Court was made independent and it was responsible for big cases like stealing someone's hen, stealing someone's nigginers, and you take such a person to a high court. No. When the British came and took over power at the Cape, they made the High Court independent and it was responsible for handling big cases like murders. More still, under administration and law, all judges were appointed and paid by the British. What does this one mean? It means that initially, during the time of the Dutch, the judges were not well paid. That is why there was a lot of corruption at the Cape and later contributed to the collapse of the Dutch rule at the Cape. Still under administration, all judges were to be independent and had to judge cases in a free and fair manner. We are all Ugandans. I don't know whether we have that in Uganda. I don't know whether our judges are free and they judge cases fairly. But what I know about our country, there is a lot of injustices. Cases are not judged fairly. It's as if our courts of law are controlled by a bigger hand from above. But in South Africa, the judges were made independent. And they judged the cases fairly without being influenced by any other person. More still, the government was not allowed to dismiss the judges. And later on, only qualified judges were allowed to preside over cases in the courts of law. Yes, as we go through this, think about your country. What is going on in the courts of law? Who appoints the judges here in Uganda? In South Africa, during the time of the British annexation of the Cape for the second time, they made the judges independent. They would not be disqualified or dismissed unless it was among themselves as judges and decide on such sensitive issues, but not being controlled by the politics of the country. Still under administration, the British criminal law was introduced to replace the old Roman harsh Dutch law that believed in an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. This is all about fairness in judging cases, unlike the Dutch, who are very harsh to those who had committed the crimes in South Africa, especially the Africans. When the British came and took over the Cape of South Africa, they wanted fairness. They protected the rights of the Africans, not the old order of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So there was a fair judgment in the courts of law, especially on the side of the Africans, unlike before when they were mistreated by the Dutch. Civil cases remained under the Dutch law, but the criminal cases were judged based on the English law. What was the English law? Of course, it encouraged fairness in judging cases. All the court sessions were made public. This was a reform that initially during the time of the Dutch, these court sessions were not made public. The Dutch would judge cases secretly without the public knowing what was taking place. And this was in favor of the Dutch at the expense of the Africans. But when the British came and took over, they made these court sessions public to all the people that were in South Africa. Another slide, Mr. Kagaba. Under education, though it is not indicated here, English education system was established to replace the Dutch one in 1822. The English language replaced the Dutch language. Yes, it was made official. Remember, it were then the British in the control of South Africa. They could not leave their language behind. It had to be promoted. It had to be spoken everywhere. So they had to make it replace the Dutch language. And it's what they wanted. It is a sign of imperialism, meaning they were now controlling everything in South Africa. Therefore, English replaced Dutch language, and it was a reform in education, meaning even in schools, English was taught. More still, an advisory council was set up in 1825, comprising of the governor, the chief judge, and the colonial secretary to advise the governor. An advisory council was set up comprising of the governor. That is, a governor has to be had from Britain, then the chief judge and the colonial secretary. What does this one mean? It meant that during the time of the Dutch, they had the Volksraad, a council of 6 elders. They didn't have advisors. Their words were final. But when these people came and took over, they streamlined the hierarchy of administration from the governor to the chief judge, then the colonial secretary, and they were there to advertise the one who was leading the country, that was the governor. That hierarchy of administration was not there during the time of the Dutch. More still, at first, all members on the council were British, but later, the Dutch were given 2 seats on the council. Yes, it was a reform. But as the time went by, the British became considerate to the Dutch. That the Dutch were the first group of people to settle in South Africa. It would be very bad for the British to dominate all the important positions in the government and ignored the Dutch. So as time went by, the Dutch also got access to the council and they gave them 2 seats. It was a reform. Then municipal councils were also set up to run the municipalities, and later legislative councils, that is LOCs, legislative councils were introduced, and they replaced the old advisory council at the Cape. All the advisory council of the Cape, this all the advisory council comprised of 6 elders. They were Dutch people. But when the British came and took over power, they introduced this reform, they brought this change, and they put up municipal councils to run municipalities. Later, they introduced the LOCs. We also have LOCs here. They operate locally. The legislative councils were introduced at the Cape, and they replaced the old advisory council of 6 Dutch elders that were dictatorial, that their words were final, and they harshly mistreated the Africans. Another slide, Mr. Kagaba. In language and education, of course, like we told in the beginning, these reforms, all these positive changes were in different sectors. This time, it's about language and education. In 1828, English was legally made the official language because the British believed in the policy of Anglicization. Yes, when the British came and took over the Cape, instead of promoting the Dutch language that they found in South Africa, they had that feeling of imperialism controlling the weaker states. It could not be done without promoting their language. that introduced the English language, and their aim was to anglicize, to make English spoken everywhere at the Cape. And of course, schools were set up and English was made official. English was spoken in each and every office in Africa, and they made sure that everyone in South Africa had to speak English. And in fact, whoever would speak English would be rewarded by the British where necessary. English was to be used in public places such as the parliament, schools, and marketplaces, among others, meaning Dutch was by that time ignored. Public schools were set up to provide free education to all children from the 4 districts which make up the Cape. Yes, public schools were set up. What does this one mean? When the British came and took over the Cape, public schools were set up, government-owned schools, and in those schools, English was supposed to be taught. Even the English teachers were always given rewards, including land, because of hoping the British to spread. Curriculum was introduced in the Cape. Mr. Kagaba, okay, that is the slide. The English curriculum was introduced in the Cape Colony, and it there is something I was going to say about schools still, that as they were teaching English and teachers were rewarded, those who could speak English very well could be given important offices, and they would perfect in speaking English from those offices because they had shown interest. The third point of this slide, appointment in offices depended on one's knowledge to English vis-a-vis Dutch language. This one is self-explanatory. So long as you could speak English very well, you would easily be appointed to an important office during the time of Abraham's Town Journal, commercial advertiser, the Africans, among others, were to be printed in English, one way of promoting and spreading their language. Unlike before, when the Dutch used to print the newspapers in Dutch language. And about education still, the reforms made in education meant that the Dutch were discriminating the Africans in education. That is why the British had to set up public schools that were for all people in South Africa. Unlike before, when the Africans were not allowed to attend schools, those who were able were charged highly, and they ended up being pushed out of the school system. When the British came and took over South Africa, they looked at the education sector, they set up schools and made serious. Mr. Kagaba, another slide.
Madam Grace. Madam Grace.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Kagaba.
I would suggest that we have around 4 minutes or 5. Can we first get questions? We see where the girls have questions before we go. Slavery and black circuit courts. Rebecca, you have a question.
Teacher, on the complete Anglicization of the course, the British came and built churches on the Cape, at the Cape. The British came and built churches at the Cape so that they could spread the Anglican religion.
Madam Grace, do you want to answer?
I've not got the question clearly.
Rebecca thinks that Anglicization of the Cape actually means that the spread of the Anglican religion at the Cape, and she's asking, did the British come and build churches at the Cape so as to spread the Anglican religion?
Mr. Kagaba.
Yes.
That point was
Yes,
all
please.
about. That point was all about spreading the English language. Therefore, the British wanted to anglicize. It's not about religion, but making sure that the English language was spread to the Cape of South Africa.
Can I add something, please?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Madam Nelima, add something.
Okay, girls, the word anglicize. To anglicize, we are using this word coming from the word English. So to anglicize, or to it is let me take this example, to Ugandanize, meaning you want people to do things according to the Uganda culture, which that would mean I want to Ugandanize people. So let's go back to the Cape and use the word anglicize. Anglicize came from the word English. So to anglicize meant that the British wanted the culture of English to be promoted in South Africa. So this culture would be promoted in various ways. Through language, it would be promoted through language in ways of maybe education, administration, and all ways of life. So to anglicize has to do with changing the culture of the people in South Africa into English culture.
Madam Nelima.
Yes.
That's why we see English judges, British judges being appointed. That's why we see the press being liberalized. That's why we see the church being liberalized, and everything is becoming English. That's why we see the British pound replacing the Dutch dollar. So in many ways, as you have said.
And additionally, the girl is using the word Anglican. The word Anglican church is the church of the English. Anglican has to do with the English church. So when you talk of anglicize, means to change people into the English culture. And one way was through the church, through education, through trade, and many others. Thank you so much.
Madam Nelima, we get another question from Joan Natkunda.
Yes.
Teacher.
Hello?
Joan, control your background.
Teacher, my hand was up by mistake. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Madam Nelima, I also had two questions from the chat room.
Yes.
One is asking that we send the notes to the Google class. Yes, we are going to send the notes to the Google class. Today, I think before 5, all the notes will be there. However, when you are writing these notes, don't keep on repeating the notes, girls, because sometimes you find we have not completed this and we have sent there the notes and we have to begin somewhere in the middle. So try to organize your notes. That is one. Another one is asking about the year Somerset was governor at the Cape. Somerset was governor from 1814 to 1826. But don't worry about Somerset. We are going to look at Governor Somerset in detail. So don't be worried about it. So if we don't have any other question, can we have somebody to lead us in a closing prayer? And we call it a week. Probably before the closing prayer, girls, I don't know, is this the last week of teaching and we have exams next week?
Next week we have a lesson. Mr. Kagaba.
Yes?
We have one more week.
We have a lesson.
We have
next
one more week.
Yes.
Oh, okay, then that's fine. So you can start preparing for the exam and so that you pass the exam. We have another question, I think, from Johanna Ayoki.
No, you asked somebody to pray.
Thank you.
Okay, Johanna, you can go ahead, please, and pray.
Okay.
Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the lesson that we have had. We thank you that we have been able to go through it successfully. We thank you for everything that our teachers, our parents, and we have put in these lessons. That the numbers may be bigger next time, and that, yeah, we may continue providing. We thank you and we bless you for this lesson. In the mighty name of Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.